Minho sat quietly in the back row of Professor Veltar's biology class. He liked this spot because it gave him a clear view of all the other students. The classroom was built like a bowl, with curved rows of seats going down toward the center where the professor stood. Today, something felt different. The usual chatter and laughing had stopped. Instead, whispers filled the air. "Did you hear? A Crithari is joining our class today," said Lila, a small rabbit-like creature from Centauri Prime. Her fur was a soft gray color, and her large ears twitched nervously. She sat one seat away from Minho, leaving an empty chair between them. Most students did this. Humans made them uncomfortable. Grix, a tall crystal being from Altair, turned around in his seat. His body was made of blue and purple crystals that clinked together when he moved. A Crithari? In an advanced biology class? That's impossible. Those savages can barely count to 10, let alone understand cellular structure. Minho frowned but said nothing. He had learned that speaking up usually made things worse. The other students already thought humans were dangerous. They called Earth a death world, and humans Deathworlders. They whispered about how humans came from a planet full of poisonous plants, deadly animals, and extreme weather. They thought all humans were violent and crazy. "I heard this one is called Thask the Ripper," whispered Zeph, an aquatic student whose skin was covered in blue scales. "He got that name in the fighting pits on Krathos Prime." More whispers spread through the classroom. Minho watched as several students moved their seats closer to the exits. Lila's ears were now flat against her head and her small hands shook as she held her data pad. Professor Veltar entered the classroom. He was a vegan, which meant he looked like a walking tree. His bark-like skin was brown and rough, and green leaves grew from his arms and head. He moved slowly but with purpose. When he reached the center of the room, he raised one branch-like arm for silence. "Students, today we welcome a new member to our class. I expect you all to show proper respect and courtesy." His voice was deep and calm, like wind through old trees. "Please remember that intelligence comes in many forms and every species has something valuable to contribute to our understanding of life." The door at the back of the classroom opened. Every student turned to look and many gasped. Thask the Ripper had to duck low to fit through the doorway. He was huge, at least 3 meters tall and nearly as wide. His body was covered in dark red scales, and he had 6 arms ending in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through metal. His head was long and narrow, filled with rows of gleaming teeth. When he breathed, small puffs of steam came from his nostrils. Several students screamed. 3 of them jumped up and ran for the exits. Lila made a small squeaking sound and tried to hide behind her data pad. Even Grix, who was usually full of confidence, backed away until his crystal body pressed against the wall. Thask looked around the classroom with large, yellow eyes. He moved carefully, trying to make himself smaller. His claws clicked against the floor with each step. The sound echoed in the now silent room. "There are no seats big enough," Thask said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "Perhaps I should leave." Minho looked around the classroom. The other students were pressed against the walls or hiding behind their desks. The only seat that might work was the one next to him. It was designed for larger species, though probably not as large as a Crethari. Without thinking, Minho stood up. "You can sit here," he said, pointing to the empty seat. "It's the biggest one in the room." Every eye in the classroom turned to stare at Minho. Lila's mouth fell open. Grix made a sound like breaking glass. Even Professor Veltar looked surprised. Thask stared at Minho for a long moment. The human was small compared to the Crithari, barely reaching his chest. Minho had black hair and brown eyes, and he wore the simple gray uniform that all students wore. He didn't look afraid, just calm and helpful. "You are certain?" Thask asked. "I am told that humans fear nothing, but surely even a Deathworlder would not sit next to a Crithari." Minho shrugged. "You need a place to sit. This is the only one that will work." He sat back down and moved his books to make more room. Thask carefully made his way down the curved steps. His claws left small scratches in the metal floor. When he reached Minho's row, he slowly lowered himself into the seat. The chair groaned under his weight but held. His massive frame took up most of the space, and one of his arms nearly touched Minho's shoulder. The rest of the class stared in shocked silence. No one could believe what they were seeing. A human Deathworlder sitting calmly next to a Crithari killer. It went against everything they thought they knew about survival instincts. Professor Veltar cleared his throat. Now that everyone is settled, let us begin today's lesson on cellular respiration across different species. He activated a holographic display that showed the inside of various cells. As you can see, while the basic process is similar, each species has developed unique adaptations. Slowly, the other students returned to their seats, though they kept glancing nervously at Thask. The Crathary pulled out a datapad that looked tiny in his massive claws. He struggled to tap the screen without damaging it. The carbon-oxygen cycle varies significantly between silicon-based and carbon-based life forms, Professor Veltar continued. Can anyone explain why this difference exists? Grix immediately raised one crystal arm. Obviously, it's because silicon-based beings like myself have superior molecular structures. Our crystalline matrix allows for more efficient energy transfer. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed he was the smartest being in the room. An interesting theory. Grix, said Professor Veltar. However, efficiency depends on environment and purpose. Each system has evolved to work best for its specific conditions. Minho noticed that Thask was having trouble with his datapad. The screen kept going dark because his claws couldn't make proper contact. Quietly, Minho pulled out a stylus from his bag and offered it to the Crathari. Thask looked down at the small writing tool, then at Minho. Why do you help me? He asked in a whisper that still sounded like distant thunder. Because you need help, Minho whispered back. That's what classmates do. For the first time since entering the room, Thask's fierce expression softened slightly. He carefully took the stylus between two claws and managed to operate his datapad without damaging it. The class continued with Professor Veltar explaining different types of cellular structures. Minho took notes and noticed that Thask was writing as well, though his handwriting looked more like scratches on the screen. When the professor asked questions, several students raised their hands, but Thask remained silent. Now, said Professor Veltar, let's discuss how different species process nutrients. Herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores all have unique digestive systems. Can anyone describe the primary differences? Lila raised a small paw. Herbivores, like my people, have longer digestive tracts to break down plant matter. We have special bacteria that help us digest cellulose. Very good, Lila. And what about carnivores? The classroom fell silent. Everyone looked at Thask, but the Crathari stared down at his datapad and said nothing. Grix smirked. I suppose our resident predator is too busy thinking about his next meal to understand biology. Several students laughed nervously. Thask's scales darkened, and his claws dug small grooves in his desk. Minho could see that the Crathari was embarrassed and angry. Actually, Minho said, speaking louder than usual, carnivores have shorter digestive systems because meat is easier to break down than plants. They also have stronger stomach acid and different enzyme production. Professor Veltar nodded approvingly. Excellent, Minho, you're absolutely correct. Thask looked at Minho with surprise. The human had answered for him, but not in a way that made him look stupid. Instead, Minho had simply provided the information that Thask knew but couldn't express in academic language. When class ended, the other students quickly gathered their things and left. Most of them gave Thask a wide space as they passed. Grix made a point of walking far around the Crathari, his crystals ringing with disdain. Thask stood up slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow over Minho. Thank you, he said quietly. For the seat, and for the stylus, and for answering the question. Minho packed his books into his bag. You're welcome. See you next class. As Minho walked toward the exit, he heard Thask call after him. Human, what is your name? Ko Minho, he replied without turning around. I am Thask. I will remember your kindness, Ko Minho. Minho nodded and left the classroom. Behind him, Thask carefully made his way through the doorway, ducking low so his head wouldn't hit the frame. Neither of them noticed Professor Veltar watching from the front of the room, a thoughtful expression on his tree-like face. Outside in the hallway, Lila caught up with Minho. Are you crazy? She whispered. That's a Crathari. They're killers. Minho adjusted his bag on his shoulder. He's also a student just like us, but he's dangerous. Minho stopped walking and looked at her. So am I, according to everyone here. But that doesn't make it true. Lila's ears twitched as she thought about this. She had never considered that maybe the stories about Deathworlders weren't completely accurate. After all, Minho had never hurt anyone. He was actually quite gentle. I never thought about it that way, she admitted. 3 weeks had passed since Thask joined the biology class. The massive Krathari still struggled with many of the concepts that seemed easy to other students. While his classmates could quickly understand cellular structures and chemical processes, Thask often stared at his datapad with confusion written across his scaled features. Minho noticed this during their daily lessons. When Professor Veltar explained photosynthesis, most students nodded and took notes. Thask wrote things down, but his yellow eyes showed that he wasn't really understanding. When the professor asked questions, Thask never raised any of his 6 arms. After class one day, Minho saw Thask sitting alone in the library. The Krathari had taken a table in the corner away from other students. His massive frame looked uncomfortable in the regular-sized chair. Books and datapads were scattered around him, and he was staring at a holographic display of a plant cell. Minho walked over quietly. Having trouble with the assignment? Thask looked up, his large eyes reflecting surprise. Minho. Yes, I do not understand these organelles. On Krathos Prime we learn about hunting, fighting, and survival. We do not study the inside of tiny things we cannot see. Minho sat down across from him. The table was big enough that he didn't feel crowded by the Krathari's size. It's not that different from hunting, actually. Each part of the cell has a job just like each member of a hunting pack. I do not understand, Thask said, his voice confused. Minho pointed to the mitochondria in the holographic cell. See these? They're like the scouts in a hunting party. They provide energy so the cell can do its work. And this, he pointed to the nucleus, is like the pack leader. It tells everyone else what to do. Thask leaned forward, his interest growing. The nucleus commands the other parts? Exactly. And the cell membrane is like the territory boundary. It decides what can come in and what has to stay out. For the first time since Minho had known him, Thask smiled. It was a frightening sight with all those sharp teeth, but his eyes showed genuine happiness. This makes sense to me. You are a good teacher, Minho. From that day forward, they began meeting in the library after each class. Minho would help Thask understand the lessons using examples the Krathari could relate to. When they studied the digestive system, Minho compared it to the way Krathari process their prey. When they learned about the nervous system, he explained it like a communication network during a hunt. Slowly, Thask began to improve. His answers in class became more confident, though he still spoke in his deep, rough voice that made some students nervous. Professor Veltar noticed the change and often nodded approvingly when Thask participated in discussions. However, not everyone was happy about Thask's progress. Grix, the crystal being from Altair, became more hostile as the weeks passed. He made snide comments about savages trying to play scientist and Deathworlders corrupting proper education. The situation came to a head during a presentation assignment. Each student had to explain a different biological process to the class. Grix chose the complex topic of neural signal transmission, clearly trying to show off his intelligence. Lila spoke about herbivore digestion, using her own species as an example. Zeph explained how aquatic breathing worked. When it was Thask's turn, he stood at the front of the class. His massive frame made the presentation area look small. He had chosen to talk about predator hunting instincts and how they related to survival biology. My people have evolved over millions of years to be efficient hunters, Thask began, his voice carrying easily through the room. Our enhanced senses, quick reflexes, and pack coordination are all biological adaptations that help us survive. He explained how Krathari eyes could see in low light, how their claws were designed for maximum grip strength, and how their enhanced hearing helped them track prey. It was clear that he understood his topic well because it was part of his daily life. But as Thask continued his presentation, Grix began making soft comments to the students around him. Primitive thinking, he whispered. All brawn, no brain. His crystal body chimed quietly as he shifted in disapproval. Thask heard the whispers but tried to continue. He began explaining how pack hunting required complex communication and strategy. Each hunter must know their role and adapt to changing situations. This requires advanced cognitive abilities and— Oh, please, Grix interrupted loudly. You're describing basic animal instincts, not intelligence. Any creature can hunt. It doesn't take a brain to kill something smaller than you. The classroom fell silent. Thask stopped mid-sentence, his scales darkening with embarrassment and anger. Several students looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Grix stood up, his crystals ringing with confidence. True intelligence is understanding abstract concepts, complex mathematics, and theoretical science, something a simple predator could never comprehend. Actually, Minho said quietly from his seat, hunting requires complex problem-solving, spatial reasoning, and predictive analysis. Thask just described advanced cognitive behaviors that many species never develop. Grix turned toward Minho, his crystal body flashing with irritation. What would a Deathworlder know about intelligence? Your people barely managed to leave their violent little planet. I know that Thask's explanation of neural pathway coordination during pack hunt shows he understands concepts you missed. In your own presentation, Minho replied calmly. What do you mean? Grix demanded. You said neural signals travel through axons at the same speed in all species. But that's incorrect. Signal speed varies based on axon diameter and myelination levels. Thask's people evolved faster neural transmission for hunting, which actually demonstrates superior neural efficiency. The classroom was dead quiet. Professor Veltar looked interested, while Grix's crystal body dimmed as he realized his mistake. Minho continued, Also, you claimed that crystal-based neural networks are inherently superior to organic ones, but crystal structures are actually slower at processing novel information because they're too rigid. Organic brains like Thask's are better at adapting to new situations. Grix's crystals flashed angrily. That's not... How dare you question my knowledge? I'm not questioning your knowledge, Minho said. I'm correcting your errors. Professor Veltar stepped forward before Grix could respond. Thank you, Thask, for an excellent presentation. Please continue. Thask looked at Minho with something like amazement in his yellow eyes. No one had ever defended him in an academic setting before. He finished his presentation with more confidence, and several students actually asked thoughtful questions afterward. When class ended, Grix stormed out without speaking to anyone. The other students gathered their things and left, many of them glancing curiously at both Minho and Thask. Why did you defend me? Thask asked as they walked to the library for their usual study session. Minho adjusted his bag on his shoulder. Because you were right and he was wrong. Science should be about truth, not showing off. But now he will be angry with you too. I can handle Grix, Minho said simply. In the library, they settled into their usual corner table. Today's lesson was about symbiotic relationships between different species. Minho was explaining how some creatures work together for mutual benefit when Lila approached their table. The small rabbit-like student looked nervous, her ears twitching as she held her data pad. Excuse me. Could I study with you two? I'm having trouble with the symbiosis concepts. Thask looked surprised. This was the first time any other student had voluntarily come near him outside of class. You are not afraid? He asked. Lila's ears twitched faster. Well, yes, a little. But Minho isn't afraid, and he's helping you understand the material. Maybe you could help me too. Minho smiled and gestured to an empty chair. Of course. The more students working together, the better we all understand. As Lila sat down, she kept glancing nervously at Thask's claws. But when the Crithari began explaining symbiosis using examples from his homeworld, she found herself fascinated instead of frightened. On Krathos Prime, there are small creatures called tick birds that live on the backs of large herbivores, Thask explained. The birds eat parasites that would otherwise harm the herbivores. Both species benefit. That's amazing, Lila said, her fear beginning to fade. Do your people have any symbiotic relationships? Thask thought for a moment. Yes, young Crithari often partner with tracking beasts during their first hunts. The beasts have better noses for finding prey, and we protect them from other predators. Minho watched as the two very different students began to understand each other. Lila stopped flinching every time Thask moved, and Thask began speaking more softly so he wouldn't startle her. Their study group grew over the following days. Zeph, the aquatic student, joined them when he struggled with respiratory systems. Even some students from other classes began sitting nearby, drawn by the interesting discussions. One evening, as they worked through a particularly difficult assignment about genetic adaptation, Thask looked up from his datapad. Minho, why did you choose to study biology? Minho paused in his note-taking. I grew up on a space station. I was always curious about all the different aliens who came through, how they lived, what they ate, how their bodies worked. I wanted to understand the science behind the diversity. And now? Lila asked. Do you still find us interesting? Minho smiled. More than ever. But not just scientifically. The announcement came during their regular Tuesday morning class. Professor Veltar stood at the center of the curved classroom, his bark-like skin darker than usual with seriousness. Students whispered nervously as they waited for him to speak. Today marks the beginning of your practical examination, the professor announced, his deep voice carrying clearly through the room. This test will count for 30% of your final grade. Worried murmurs spread through the students. Lila's ears flattened against her head and even Grick shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Only Minho and Thask remained calm, though both paid careful attention to the professor's words. You will work in pairs to solve a biological crisis, Professor Veltar continued. He activated the large holographic display, showing a massive spaceship floating in dark space. This is the colony ship New Harmony. It carries 50,000 beings from 12 different species to establish a new settlement on Kepler 438b. The hologram zoomed in to show the inside of the ship. Corridors stretched for kilometers, filled with different environments for different species. There were water-filled sections for aquatic beings, crystal gardens for silicon-based life forms, and various atmospheric zones to accommodate different breathing requirements. 3 days ago, New Harmony sent a distress signal, the professor explained. A mysterious plague has struck the ship. Different species are showing different symptoms, and the ship's medical staff cannot identify the cause. The ship is too far from any medical facility to receive help. The display changed to show medical data scrolling past, infection rates, symptom lists, and biological readings from various species. The numbers looked frightening. Your task is to identify the pathogen and develop treatment protocols that will work for all affected species, Professor Veltar said. You have until the end of the week to present your solutions. Minho raised his hand. Professor, how do we choose partners? You may select your own partners. However, each pair must represent different biological classifications. A carbon-based student cannot partner with another carbon-based student, for example. Students immediately began looking around the room trying to find suitable partners. Since most of the class was carbon-based, this rule made pairing difficult. Grick stood up quickly, his crystal body ringing with confidence. I'll work alone. My superior silicon-based intellect doesn't need the limitations of organic thinking. Professor Veltar frowned. The assignment requires pairs, Grix. Then I'll work with whoever's left over, Grix replied dismissively. It doesn't matter since I'll be doing all the real work anyway. Minho turned to Thask. Want to be partners? The massive Kratari looked surprised. But we are both carbon-based, the professor said. Actually, Minho interrupted, Kratari are classified as silicon-enhanced carbon-based. Your bone structure has silicon compounds and your scale armor contains silicon crystals. Technically, your hybrid classification, Professor Veltar nodded approvingly. Minho is correct. Kratari biology does qualify as a different classification. Thask's eyes lit up with understanding. Then yes, Minho. I would be honored to work with you. Around the room, other pairs formed quickly. Lila partnered with Zeph, the aquatic student. Several other carbon-based students paired with the few silicon or gas-based beings in the class. Grix was left alone, scowling at everyone. Very well, Professor Veltar said. I'll provide you with access to the ship's complete medical database, environmental data, and communication logs. Remember, thousands of lives depend on your analysis. The simulation began immediately. Each pair received access to detailed files about the colony ship and its medical crisis. Minho and Thask found a quiet corner of the library and spread out all the information on a large table. Look at this pattern, Minho said, pointing to infection data on his screen. The illness started in the agricultural section, then spread to living quarters near the food processing areas. Thask studied the ship's layout with his enhanced predator vision, able to spot details that others might miss. The ventilation systems connect these areas, but some sections with shared air supplies are not affected. That's interesting, Minho agreed. If it was airborne, everyone sharing the same air would be sick. They worked through the first day analyzing symptoms across different species. The illness caused fever and weakness in most beings, but each species showed unique additional symptoms. Carbon-based life forms had respiratory problems. Silicon-based beings developed crystal fractures. Aquatic species suffered from scale rot. It's like the pathogen adapts to each species. Thask observed, or target specific biological processes that work differently in each species, Minho added. Meanwhile, at nearby tables, other groups struggled with the complexity of the data. Lila and Zeph had organized their information well, but couldn't find patterns in the infection spread. Other pairs argued about different approaches to the problem. Grix worked alone at a distant table, his crystal body flashing with irritation every time he looked at data that didn't fit his theories. He had convinced himself that the answer was simple and that his superior intellect would solve it quickly. On the second day, Minho and Thask made a breakthrough. While reviewing the ship's supply manifests, Thask's hunting instincts noticed something unusual. Minho, look at this food shipment record, Thask said, pointing to an entry with one of his claws. A new protein supplement was distributed to all species 3 days before the illness started. Minho examined the data. Universal protein complex designed to work with any biological system. But that should be impossible. Different species need completely different nutrients. Unless, Thask said slowly, the supplement adapts to each species it encounters. Adaptive biological technology, Minho whispered. That would explain the different symptoms. The supplement is trying to integrate with each species' biology, but it's causing toxic reactions instead. They spent the rest of the day researching adaptive biotechnology and how it might malfunction. The more they learned, the more convinced they became that they had found the answer. On the third day, a new crisis emerged. The simulation was interrupted when alarms began blaring throughout the university. Emergency lights flashed in the corridors, and automated announcements echoed from speakers. All students report to designated safe areas immediately. This is not a drill. Students in the library looked around in confusion and fear. Professor Veltar's voice came over the communication system. Students, please remain calm and proceed to the nearest emergency assembly point. As everyone gathered their belongings, Minho noticed something wrong. Hana, a young Korean exchange student from Earth who often studied at nearby tables, was having trouble breathing. Her face was turning pale and she kept touching her throat. Hana, are you okay? Minho asked, moving toward her. Can't breathe. She gasped. Something in the air. Burning. Minho's eyes widened as he saw her symptoms getting worse. Her throat was swelling and red spots were appearing on her skin. She's having an allergic reaction, he said to Thask. Other students nearby heard this and began to panic. Allergic to what? Lila squeaked. Minho looked around quickly and spotted the source. Grix had been working with some crystal samples from his homeworld, trying to prove a theory about silicon-based immunity. The samples were giving off a fine dust that was invisible to most species but deadly to humans. Altarian crystal dust, Minho said grimly. It's toxic to human respiratory systems. Hana collapsed, struggling to breathe. Her lips were turning blue and her hands clawed at her throat. Students screamed and backed away, not knowing how to help. We need to get her to the medical center, Zeph said frantically. It's too far, Minho replied, kneeling beside Hana. She'll die before we get there. Then what do we do? Lila cried. Minho looked up at his friends, his usually calm expression now intense and focused. We treat her here, now, but we're just students, someone protested. No, Minho said firmly, his voice carrying a tone no one had heard from him before. Right now I'm a human from a death world, and humans don't give up when someone is dying. Around the library, students stared in shock as the quiet, gentle human they thought they knew began to transform before their eyes. His movements became quick and precise. His voice took on commanding authority, and his eyes showed a determination that made even Thask step back in amazement. The real test was about to begin, and it would reveal truths about all of them that none had expected. Hana's breathing grew more labored, and her skin turned an alarming shade of blue. Time was running out, and the medical center was still several corridors away. Students looked around helplessly, but Minho was already moving with purpose. Thask, I need your help, Minho said, his voice steady despite the crisis. Everyone else clear the area around her. As students scrambled to give them space, Minho began to reveal capabilities that no one in the class had ever suspected he possessed. The quiet study partner they thought they knew was about to show them what it really meant to be a human from a death world. The emergency alarms continued to wail, but in the library a different kind of emergency was unfolding, one that would change how everyone saw each other forever. Minho knelt beside Hana as her breathing became more desperate. The other students formed a nervous circle around them, unsure what to do. The quiet human they thought they knew was suddenly moving with swift, precise actions that none of them had ever seen before. "Thask, I need you to hold her shoulders steady," Minho commanded, his voice calm but urgent. "Don't let her move, but be gentle. Your strength could hurt her if you're not careful." The massive Krathari immediately moved to Hana's side. Despite his fearsome claws, he positioned his hands with surprising delicacy, holding her shoulders just firmly enough to keep her still. "What's happening to her?" Lila whispered, her voice shaking with fear. "Anaphylactic shock," Minho replied, quickly examining Hana's throat and checking her pulse. The crystal dust triggered a severe allergic reaction. Her throat is swelling shut and her blood pressure is dropping. "But the medical center," Zeph started to say. "She'll be dead in less than 10 minutes if we don't act now." Minho cut him off. He looked around the library with sharp, calculating eyes. "I need a chemistry kit, some tubing, and a sharp, sterile blade. We can't perform surgery." Grix protested, his crystal body flashing with panic. "We're students, not doctors." Minho's eyes fixed on Grix with an intensity that made the crystal being step backward. "You caused this by bringing uncontained crystal samples into a public area. Now either help or get out of my way." Other students had never heard Minho speak with such authority. His usual gentle manner was gone, replaced by focused determination that seemed almost frightening. "There's a chemistry lab next door," Lila said quickly. "I saw them doing experiments earlier." "Get the emergency kit from there," Minho ordered. "Bring anything that looks medical." "Zeph, I need you to find some flexible tubing. About this thick." He showed the diameter with his fingers. As his friends scattered to gather supplies, Minho continued his examination of Hana. Her skin was now a dangerous shade of blue, and her struggles to breathe were becoming weaker. "I need to create an airway," he explained to Thask. "The swelling in her throat is blocking oxygen to her lungs." "You mean cut into her throat?" Thask asked, his yellow eyes wide with concern. "Yes, it's called an emergency tracheotomy. Humans developed this technique because we live on a world where everything tries to kill us. We learn to save each other when there's no other choice." Thask watched in amazement as Minho felt along Hana's neck with his fingers, apparently locating specific anatomical landmarks. "How do you know how to do this?" "All humans learn basic emergency medicine," Minho replied. "When you live on a death world, you can't always wait for help to arrive." Lila returned with an armload of medical supplies from the chemistry lab. Her small hands shook as she set everything down beside Minho. "I found bandages, antiseptic, and some surgical tools." Minho quickly sorted through the items, selecting what he needed. "Perfect. Zeph, did you find tubing?" The aquatic student nodded, holding up a section of clear, flexible tubing. "Will this work?" "That's exactly what I need." Minho took the tubing and examined it carefully. "Now everyone needs to stay calm. This is going to look scary, but it will save her life." He poured antiseptic over a small surgical blade, then over his hands and Hana's throat. His movements were quick but precise with no wasted motion. "Thask, when I make the incision, I need you to use 2 of your claws to hold the opening apart. Can you do that without cutting her?" The Krathari nodded seriously. "My claws are sharp, but I have excellent control. I will not harm her." "Good. On my count. 3, 2, 1. Minho made a small, careful cut in Hana's throat, just below the swelling. Immediately, Thask positioned 2 of his smaller claws to gently hold the incision open, creating a small airway. "Now the tube," Minho said, carefully inserting the tubing into the opening. "This will let air flow directly to her lungs, bypassing the blocked area." As soon as the tube was in place, Hana's desperate struggling stopped. Air flowed freely through the new pathway, and her skin began to return to a normal color. The students watching let out gasps of relief and amazement. Lila was crying, and even Grix had stopped protesting to stare in shock at what Minho had accomplished. "Is she going to be okay?" Zeph asked. "She needs proper medical care, but she's stable now," Minho replied, carefully securing the tube with bandages. "We bought her time." "That was incredible," Lila whispered. "How did you know exactly what to do?" Minho looked up at his friends, and they saw something new in his expression. The quiet, gentle student was still there, but underneath was something stronger and more capable than they had ever imagined. "This is what humans do," he said simply. When someone is in danger, we don't give up. We don't run away. We figure out how to fix the problem. But you're so calm about it, Task observed. You showed no fear even when performing surgery. Fear doesn't help in a crisis, Minho explained as he monitored Hana's breathing.
Humans evolved to think clearly under pressure.
When everything around us was trying to kill us, the ones who panicked didn't survive to have children. Professor Veltar arrived with medical personnel who had finally reached the library. They carefully transported Hana to the medical center, praising Minho's quick thinking and skill. You saved her life, the head medic told him. That was textbook emergency procedure, performed under extremely difficult conditions. After the medical team left with Hana, the students sat in stunned silence. They looked at Minho differently now, seeing abilities they had never suspected. I don't understand, Grick said quietly. You're always so peaceful. You study plants and cellular biology. How did you learn to do what you just did? Minho sat back down at their study table, but his friends noticed he was still alert, still watching everything around them. All humans learn survival skills, we have to. Earth isn't just a difficult planet, it's actively hostile to life. But you never act dangerous, Lila said. You're always helpful and kind. Being dangerous and being violent are different things, Minho explained. Humans are dangerous because we adapt. We solve problems. We don't give up when things seem impossible. Thask leaned forward, his massive frame making the chair creak. You said we don't give up. You included me. Minho smiled slightly. You held her perfectly still during the surgery. Your claws were steadier than any medical instrument. You adapted to help save someone from a completely different species. That's exactly what humans do. But I am Krathari. We are hunters, not healers. You're whatever the situation requires you to be, Minho said. That's what intelligence really means. Not just knowing facts, but being able to use what you know in new ways. Around the library, other students who had witnessed the emergency were talking in hushed voices. Word spread quickly through the university about what had happened. The quiet human who everyone thought was just another peaceful student had performed emergency surgery to save a life. I owe you an apology, Grick said suddenly. His crystal body had dimmed with shame. I brought those crystal samples without proper containment. I could have killed her. Mistakes happen, Minho replied. What matters is learning from them. But you saved her life because of my carelessness. And I've been treating both of you badly all semester. Thask looked at the crystal being with surprise. You admit error? I have to, Grick said quietly. I thought I was the smartest being in the class. But when someone was dying, I panicked and did nothing. You two worked together and saved her life. That's real intelligence. Professor Veltar returned to the library and found the three unlikely friends talking quietly together. I wanted to thank you all, he said. The medical team confirms that Hana will make a full recovery because of your quick actions. It wasn't just me, Minho said. Thask's precision and Lila's quick thinking with the supplies were just as important. Yeah, Lila added. And if Grix hadn't realized what the dust was, we might not have known what was causing the reaction. Professor Veltar nodded approvingly. This is exactly what I hoped to see when I created mixed species classes. Different abilities working together to solve problems. Professor, Thask asked, what about our practical examination? We lost time during the emergency. Actually, the professor replied with something that might have been a smile on his tree-like face. You just completed the most important test of all. You proved that knowledge without compassion is worthless. But compassion combined with knowledge can save lives. As they packed up their study materials, Minho noticed that other students were looking at him and Thask differently. Not with fear or suspicion, but with respect and curiosity. Things are going to change now, aren't they? Thask asked. Probably, Minho agreed. But maybe that's good. People should know that being dangerous doesn't make you bad. And being different doesn't make you enemy. And being smart doesn't make you better than everyone else, Grix added quietly. As they walked together toward the dormitories, their small group had become something new. They were no longer just the human Deathworlder, the scary Carnivore, and the arrogant crystal being. They were friends who had proven they could work together when it mattered most. Tomorrow they would finish their practical examination. But tonight they had learned something more valuable than any textbook could teach. That the best solutions come not from individual brilliance, but from different kinds of strength working together. And somewhere in the medical center 2 days after the emergency in the library, Hana returned to classes with a small bandage on her throat and a bright smile for everyone who had helped save her life. The news of what happened had spread throughout the university, and students who had never spoken to Minho or Thask before now greeted them in the hallways. The practical examination resumed with a new energy in Professor Veltar's classroom. Students worked more cooperatively, and the barriers between different species seemed less important than before. Today, each pair will present their solutions to the new harmony crisis, Professor Veltar announced. Remember, you're not just explaining a theory. You're proposing a treatment that could save thousands of lives. Grix went first. The crystal being had worked alone as he insisted, but his presentation was different from his usual confident showboating. I believed the answer would be simple, he began, his crystal body dim with humility. I thought my superior processing power would identify the pathogen quickly. He showed his analysis, which focused on silicon-based contamination in the ship's systems. His work was thorough and technically correct, but limited. However, Grix continued, I realized my solution only addresses silicon-based life forms. I failed to consider the needs of other species because I believed they were less important. He paused, looking directly at Minho and Thask. Recent events have taught me that intelligence comes in many forms, and the best solutions consider everyone. Other pairs presented their findings. Lila and Zeph had identified several possible pathogens but couldn't decide between them. Another team had developed treatments for specific species, but admitted they couldn't create universal solutions. Finally, it was time for Minho and Thask to present. They walked to the front of the classroom together, the quiet, human and the massive Kratheri, who had become the most unlikely partnership in the university. We believe the pathogen is not a traditional disease, Minho began, activating the holographic display. The evidence points to a malfunctioning adaptive biotechnology. The display showed the colony ship's supply records, focusing on the universal protein complex that Thask had identified. This supplement was designed to adapt to any species' biological needs, Thask explained. But instead of providing nutrition, it's trying to rewrite each species' cellular structure. Minho continued the explanation. The symptoms vary by species because the supplement attacks different biological systems. It targets whatever makes each species unique. That explains the pattern of infection, Professor Veltar said, clearly impressed. But how do you propose to treat it? We don't fight the supplement, Thask said. We redirect it. Minho activated another display showing their proposed treatment. The supplement is designed to adapt, so we introduce a harmless target that's easier to modify than living tissue, specifically designed decoy proteins that the supplement will prefer over biological targets. Think of it like giving a hunter easier prey, Thask added, using an analogy that made sense to him. The supplement will abandon its attack on the difficult targets and focus on the simple ones. Once the supplement is distracted by the decoy proteins, we introduce a neutralizing agent, Minho continued. This agent breaks down both the supplement and the decoys, clearing them from each organism's system. Professor Veltar studied their data carefully. This solution would work for all species simultaneously? Yes, both students answered together. And the neutralizing agent won't harm any of the affected species? We tested it against the biological profiles of all 12 species on the ship, Minho replied. The agent only targets the specific molecular structure of the supplement. The classroom was silent as Professor Veltar and the other students absorbed the complexity and elegance of the solution. Finally, the professor spoke. This is remarkable work. You've not only identified the cause but developed a universal treatment that considers the needs of every species involved. Grix raised one crystal arm. Professor, I have a question for Minho and Thask. Go ahead, Grix. How did you develop such a comprehensive solution? My analysis was more detailed, but their answer is clearly superior. Minho and Thask looked at each other before Minho answered. We combined our different perspectives. Thask's hunting instincts helped identify patterns I missed. My human adaptability helped find creative solutions. Neither of us could have done it alone. But there's something else, Thask added. Working together taught us that the best solutions don't just solve the immediate problem. They consider everyone affected. Professor Veltar nodded approvingly. Explain what you mean. Many of the other solutions would work, Minho said. But they would save some species while leaving others to die. We couldn't accept that. On Krathos Prime, successful hunts require every pack member to survive, Thask explained. You don't abandon the weak. You find ways for everyone to contribute and everyone to benefit. And humans from Deathworlds learn that survival depends on cooperation. Minho added, We save everyone or we fail. Lila raised her small paw. Does that mean your solution comes from being a human and a Kratari specifically? No, Minho replied thoughtfully. It comes from understanding that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Any species working together could have found this answer. Professor Veltar announced the results of the practical examination at the end of class. Minho and Thask have created the most comprehensive and effective solution. Their work will be forwarded to the Galactic Health Council for potential real-world application. After class, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual quick exit, students lingered to talk with each other. The emergency had broken down barriers that had existed all semester. Thask, called Zeph, the aquatic student, could you help me understand predator-pack dynamics? I'm working on a research project about group cooperation. I would be honored to help, Thask replied, his fierce appearance softened by genuine pleasure at being asked. Grix approached Minho hesitantly. I owe you more than an apology. Would you be willing to study together sometimes? I think I could learn from your problem-solving methods. Of course, Minho said. We could all study together. As the semester progressed, their small study group grew into something larger. Students from different species, different classes, and different worlds began meeting regularly in the library. They called themselves the Diversity Study Group, and their collaborative approach to learning became famous throughout the university. Professor Veltar often stopped by their table, amazed at how well different species worked together when they focused on understanding rather than competing. This is what education should accomplish, he told them one evening. Not just learning facts, but learning to value each other's contributions. The real test came at the end of the semester when the university held elections for student representatives to the Interspecies Council. This council made decisions about university policies, research funding, and interspecies relations. To everyone's surprise, Minho and Thask were nominated together as a team candidate. Many students supported them, but others worried about having a human Deathworlder and a Kratari predator representing the student body. Do you really think it's wise to elect the two most dangerous species to speak for everyone? Asked a worried student during the campaign debate. Minho and Thask stood together at the front of the packed auditorium. They had faced this question many times over the past weeks. We're not asking you to vote for us because we're dangerous, Minho said calmly. We're asking you to vote for us because we've proven that different kinds of strength can work together. The emergency in the library showed that when crisis comes, we need beings who can adapt, cooperate, and refuse to give up, Thask added. These qualities aren't limited to humans and Kratari. Every species has unique strengths. Our campaign promise is simple, Minho continued. We will make sure every student's voice is heard, every species' needs are considered, and every problem is approached with both logic and compassion. We've learned that the best solutions come not from the smartest individual, but from different perspectives working together, Thask concluded. The election results were announced the following week. Minho and Thask won by the largest margin in university history. With support from every species represented in the student body, their first act as student representatives was to establish mentorship programs pairing students from different species and worlds. Their second was to create emergency response teams with members trained in interspecies medical aid. Months later, as they sat in their usual corner of the library working on new research projects, Minho reflected on how much had changed since that first day when Thask entered their biology class. Do you ever regret coming to university instead of following traditional Kratari warrior training? Minho asked his friend. Thask looked up from his datapad where he was working on a thesis about ethical hunting practices. Never. I learned that there are many ways to be strong, and the strongest way is to use your abilities to help others. What about you? Thask asked. Do you regret leaving Earth? Minho smiled, looking around at their diverse group of friends studying together. I came here to